Welcome, everyone. It's a delight to be here with you all. My name is Angelica Gonzalez Apple. I am the GCCM Program Manager of North America. Welcome to the Divestment, Extraction, and Net Zero by 2050 webinar. Just a few housekeeping tips. We have translations in Spanish, Portuguese, and French today. And you can find those translations if you go to the GCCM Facebook pages in those specific languages to assist you. It is a great honor to be here with you all. I welcome you all from all around the world, and I want to thank in advance to all the speakers that we have on this panel and my colleagues that have made this webinar already a success. Today, I welcome you all to join us in this wonderful webinar. And the goal today is to hope to inspire you to learn more about divestment, but also inspire you and your community to learn and to want to divest. I am delighted to be here and introduce these wonderful panelists that we have and speakers. I will have the opportunity to introduce them specifically as they will be speaking, and I will give you their bio. But I'm just delighted, and I want to thank all the speakers that have been here with us to make this webinar tremendous and fantastic. And so I'd like to introduce and start, again, just to let you know, my name is Angelica Gonzalez. I am the Program Manager for North America. It is wonderful for you all to be here. And I would like to begin with introducing our Executive Director, Tomás Insua. Tomás is the co-founder and Executive Director of the Global Catholic Climate Movement.
Hello, warm greetings from Rome. Delighted to be with you all. Can you hear well?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. So, well, it's a great joy to be co-hosting this important dialogue. Indeed, we're at a time when heat waves and flood storms and droughts are ravaging our planet, truly are ravaging our communities. So our planet is ringing the alarm bells. The urgency of the climate emergency couldn't be greater. That said, this is why this dialogue about fossil fuel divestment and net zero is so urgent, so pressing. We know that, a total of over 130 countries have already adopted or announced or considering net zero targets, covering over 70% of global emissions. We know that various fossil fuel companies even have set some net zero goals, but net zero goals that we know have lots of loopholes and problems, so they have significant shortcomings. So it's clear the net zero target is clear, but still which is a big milestone, I think, that we've reached this point of having that consensus of really implementing the Paris Agreement and following the IPCC recommendations of what needs to happen in order to accomplish the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. And in the light of that, but we know that that's not enough, right? There's a need to commit to significant reductions in carbon emissions immediately, with the buy-in, let's say, of all countries, starting today, not a few decades from now, and not tricking ourselves with creative accounting. We know that physics can be tricked. So that said, despite this destruction, the climate emergency just continues and gets each time worse and worse. And fossil fuel financing just continues to flow, just continues to build up new projects, new fossil fuel infrastructure that just worsens this climate emergency, and also with terrible impacts at the community level, with terrible human rights abuses and all kind of problems that we know are typical of the fossil fuel industry. So that said, it's also, and here just thinking of projects like Line 3 in the United States, or the East African crude oil pipeline, ECOP, being pursued, despite being totally incompatible with the Paris Agreement, is really outrageous. And the Catholic Church has adopted a very strong, very clear position regarding the expansion of the fossil fuel industry in these times of the Paris Agreement. We've had strong statements such as that, those of Pope Francis. Pope Francis has said a number of times very strong statements. For example, let me quote him. He said in one of his recent speeches to the oil CEOs precisely, he said, "We need to do everything in our capacity to limit global average temperature rise under the threshold of 1.5 C enshrined in the Paris Climate Agreement." And he said explicitly, "Yet even more worrisome is the continued search for new fossil fuel reserves, whereas the Paris Agreement clearly urged keeping most fossil fuels underground." So Pope Francis' very clear position criticizing the expansion of the fossil fuel industry and criticizing the search for new fossil fuel reserves when we have too many already. And furthermore, the Vatican has issued very strong guidelines recommending fossil fuel divestment, so Catholic institutions to move away their investments away from the fossil fuel industry because they're not complying with the Paris Agreement. And moreover, so it's not only speeches on guidelines, but in practice, we know the Vatican Bank has said is not investing in fossil fuels. Tons of Catholic organizations have divested, ranging from, it's over 250 Catholic institutions, dioceses, universities, etc., that have moved away their finances away from the fossil fuel industry because they're not complying with the Paris Agreement. So anyways, and that said, this is where we're delighted to have this dialogue. We have to, especially in the light of this new report from the International Energy Agency, this is where we're delighted to have Dr. Birol share a bit more about this important report, which is yet another proof that we cannot allow this expansion of the fossil fuel industry. We don't need new fossil fuel projects any longer. So it's great to have this growing consensus. The Catholic Church, the Catholic community at large is delighted with this report, and we look forward to having a conversation about it. So thanks for joining us, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Tomas. Thank you for those very urgent words and invitation for divestment. And so as we began this webinar, I forgot to mention that it's really important for us to know where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you in the chat. Introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining us from.
Sorry, Angelica, I think we cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you again, Tomas. I want to make sure that we get to hear from you all and know where you are joining us from. So if you could introduce yourself in the comment section and the chat, if you're joining us through YouTube or through Facebook, your name and your country or your location. We'd love to be able to share that and get to know you all. We will have an opportunity to ask questions from our panelists, but just as Tomas mentioned, Dr. Birol, I am very honored that he's here and able to join us and have him as a speaker. Dr. Birol has served as an executive director of the International Energy Agency since September of 2015. Under his leadership, the IEA has undertaken its first comprehensive program since its creation in 1974. Dr. Birol has been named by Forbes magazine amongst the most influential people of the world's energy scene and was recognized by Financial Times in 2017 as Energy Personality of the Year. Thank you so much, Dr. Birol, for being here with us. He will talk for about 15 minutes, and then we will open questions for Dr. Birol. Welcome.
Thank you very much to you, in fact, for inviting the International Energy Agency to this important gathering. Now, perhaps first of all, a few words about the IEA, the International Energy Agency. We are an intergovernmental organization based in Paris, and we have 38 members of the IEA family: US, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, all European countries, South Africa, Morocco, China, India, 38 countries, which covers about 75% of global energy use, again, a governmental body. We are the energy organization, and when I say energy, energy is in fact a very good thing. Energy makes our lives more comfortable, productive, provides welfare, and also the lifeblood of our economic and social lives. However, energy is today at the same time responsible for about 80% of the emissions causing climate change. In other words, climate change is essentially an energy problem. Without fixing the problem in the energy sector, we have no chance whatsoever to solve our climate problem. And based on this, since years, as the leading energy institution of the world, we have been carrying out several, especially in the last 5 years, several studies, events, actions in terms of addressing the climate change. And as our colleagues just mentioned, on last May, 18th of May, we came up with a report, global roadmap to net zero by 2050. So I would like to tell you why we did this report, and second, what are the some key takeaways of this report, which, as many newspapers and colleagues said, shook the energy world. Now, many governments now, US, Canada, UK, European countries, UK, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, China, they made commitments at heads of states level to say that the global emissions, they will bring their emissions to net zero to a globally to reach a 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Many governments around the world. Why 1.5 degrees to keep the temperature there? Because scientists around the world told us, and we believe them, that if we still want to have a livable planet, temperature increase should be a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this would mean to change the way we produce and use energy. Now, the governments put this target for 2050, but what was important is to make a roadmap what needs to happen in the energy sector to reach those government targets. To put the target is good, but we wanted to show the world what are the next steps that the governments around the world need to do in terms of the energy sector. So what we came up with is a roadmap which shows that to reach those targets is a very difficult, a Herculean task, but still achievable if we act quickly and if there is a international collaboration among the countries. So, based on our report, I can tell you that the world has three major categories of tasks. Three. The first one, especially in the next 10 years, we have to make sure that there is a massive expansion of the clean energy technologies that which are already today in the market today with us. What are those? Solar, wind, hydropower, electric cars, energy efficiency. They are already with us, but we have to see a major expansion of use of those. This is number one. This is good, but this is not enough. Number two, at the same time, there are some technologies which are not in the market yet, which are under development, which are still not part of our daily lives, such as hydrogen applications, such as advanced battery technologies. Such technologies should be sooner rather than later part of our energy systems, because the first category alone is not enough to reach our target. So we have to, innovation is the name of the game. We have to innovate here. This is number two. Number three, and the last big category, is that we have to see a massive decline of fossil fuel use. Coal, oil, and gas. They have to decline substantially. So these are the three categories of jobs we have in front of us. Make the most out of the existing technologies. Second, innovate and push the technologies which are under development, make them part of the market. And third, reduce the use of fossil fuels in our world. These are all big jobs to do, and we have also to provide a roadmap for the governments around the world. We came up over 400 milestones, what needs to happen and when they need to happen. Let me give you a couple of examples. For example, as of this year, end of this year, we shouldn't build any new coal-fired power plants. As of 2030, 60% of the car sales globally should be electric cars. So 60% of the cars sales electric cars, compared to it is 5% today. From 5%, it needs to go to 60%. Or the year 2040, the half of the fuels for aviation, for the planes, need to come from sustainable fuels, not from the existing oil products. So we have such over 400 milestones that we have to implement. We also say that, of course, these milestones and the roadmaps by different countries to be designed based on their national circumstances, their affordability. I cannot put an African, sub-Saharan African country with a European country in the same basket. So it is the reason we are working with many governments now to help them to build their national roadmaps to 2050. And I am very much encouraged with several governments around the world knocking on the door of the International Energy Agency to help them to build their national roadmaps according to their national circumstances. Maybe I stop here, and if you have questions and comments, I will be delighted to try to respond to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Birol, and thank you for that. I really loved how you mentioned act quickly and collaboration. And innovation is the name of the game. There was a question regarding the tasks. On task 2, you talked about new technology that's in development, and it's currently not available now. But one of the questions was if you could repeat some of the names of the new developing technologies for this task.
Of course, we have analyzed over 800 technologies, to be frank with you. But if I can tell you a couple of them, first of all, hydrogen, different hydrogen applications, advanced battery technologies, the carbon capture and storage, including direct air capture to suck the carbon from the atmosphere and clean it up. Small, in some countries, small model reactor. So there's a range of technologies, and some countries don't like this technology and can choose the other one. Some don't like the I don't know, solar. Some don't like nuclear. It is everybody should choose their own technology. But the important thing is they all need to serve to reduce the emissions. But this innovation, again, will not happen by itself. It is not just we sit in front of our computers and laboratories. There is a need for governments to increase their research and development activities, their support in the direction of clean energy technologies. Without that support, without those incentives, it will not happen from one day to another. So therefore, in order to innovation to happen, government support will be essential.
Great, thank you. And another question is, why should we divest from fossil fuels immediately?
Pardon me? I didn't get it.
Why should we divest from fossil fuels immediately?
Yeah. So our numbers show that if the world to reach net zero by 2050, the oil, gas, and coal consumption need to decline quickly and substantially. If the oil demand goes down, for example, or coal demand goes down, there is no need to invest in oil, gas, or coal. The existing ones are enough to meet the declining demand for these fossil fuels. There is no need for that. And it is the reason our very much hope and the discussion with the government leaders goes to the point that the governments around the world, latest in the COP26 in Glasgow, need to give an unmistakable signal to investors around the world, saying that you investor, if you invest in the fossil fuels, you are risking to lose your money, because we are united and we want to have a clean energy future. And again, you investor, if you put money in the clean energy, you see we are all together here, the world's governments, and you can make good money. So therefore, my expectation, my hope is that the governments around the world, but also the grassroots work organization like yourselves should make the investors understand that in the future, investing in fossil fuels may not be a lucrative business. It is not we shouldn't leave it to the investors whether or not they want to save the planet, because investors, in most cases, their main motivation is profit. So therefore, we should make them understand that the investing in fossil fuels may not be a profitable business in the future, by showing them what the governments around the world would like to see. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and that's a great point. And as you mentioned, our grassroots and the work GCCM does with our Catholic community, what would you suggest to a large group like the Catholic community and our members in the countries of the global South to start from? Like, what could we begin to do in implementing this report?
So my suggestion is, our report is very well received. I was last week, I had a discussion on this with Cardinal Turkson in Vatican, whom I invited to be a member of the People-Centered Clean Energy Commission I convened at the IEA, which looks at the possible negative implications of the living fossil fuels on those communities, because there are some communities based on coal, and if there is no coal investment, they will be unemployed. How we deal with this fact, and I convene a group chaired by Prime Minister of Denmark, some government leaders and thought leaders around the world, and I am happy that the Cardinal Turkson became a member of the commission I recently convened. What you can do? You can do the many things, but if I can choose one topic, it is the following. The facts are very, very clear. We should all make the investors understand that it is for two reasons they should not invest anymore in the dirty energies. Number one, it is not good for them. It is not good for them because the cities they are living, it can be London, it can be New York, it can be California, it can be Singapore, they are going to have huge problems in terms of facing extreme weather events. The buildings, the skyscrapers they are living in may well be affected from that. Not only those, but the family houses they are living, before they come to their skyscrapers, they will be in trouble. They should understand this, number one. Number two, if it is not enough, this human aspect, including the human aspect in Africa, in India, in Latin America, if it is not enough, this human aspect, you can tell them that the world is going, the big chunk of the governments around the world are going in the direction of clean energy, and they are soon finding ways to put burden on the dirty energy, and they are facing to lose money from their investing in dirty energy. They can make a few years of handsome profits, but energy business is a long time business. So they are risking to lose money from the investment if they go there, because the numbers are very, very clear. So my suggestion is going in two directions: on the human aspect for their own lives and the lives of the millions of people around the world. They are risking it with their investments. And the second, they are also risking their own profits in the future. I would push these two buttons as a humble suggestion from me.
Thank you so much. These are wonderful suggestions. This gives us plenty of work to do. It's been a great honor to have you with us, Dr. Birol. Thank you for sharing all your information, and we hope to work with you and have you on another webinar soon. Thank you so much. I now open the floor back to Tomas, that's going to talk to us a little bit about the future of divestment.
So yes, we're Indeed, after these wonderful remarks from Dr. Birol, I think we have yet another reason to dive deeper into the fossil fuel divestment question. Indeed, if the world needs no new fossil fuels, that means there is a need to move away our financial investments. As Dr. Birol was saying, there are lots of, we need to talk to investors, and there are lots of Catholic investors, and ranging from dioceses to universities to many other Catholic institutions have lots of financial resources. Many of them have already started moving their investments away from the fossil fuel company. This needs just to accelerate for the reasons just stated. So in this regard, it's also exciting that we have our next fossil fuel divestment announcement already scheduled. It's taking place on October 25th this year. That will be a good moment just to mark in our calendars. It's right before COP26. Which, in other words, is a nice way of sending a clear message, a clear signal to governments and policymakers gathering at COP26. So please mark the date. We'll talk more about that later in this webinar. But I think what we just heard is yet another reason. Like if we had plenty of moral arguments from Laudato Si. There was I will not get into all the richness of what Pope Francis has said about the issue, but this technical argument now, a technical roadmap and this is yet another roadmap, because there were many other roadmaps that said it in the past, but one with the authority of the IEA making it so clear that no new fossil fuels are needed, just I think is a perfect segue into the rest of this conversation. So I'll pass it back to you, Angelica, and looking forward to the dialogue.
Thank you, Tomas. Yes, I am super excited. This roadmap sounds very hopeful. It's a clean energy roadmap that gives us something we all can participate in. And I want to keep this energy flowing as I present our next speaker. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to introduce speaker by speaker. And at the end of our speakers, we will then open up a section for questions and answers. But continue putting in the comments where you're joining us from. If you joined us a little bit late, no worries. Just let us know what country you're joining us from. It's with great pleasure that I now introduce Daniela Andrade. Daniela is a member of the Churches and Mining Network and REPAM. She is a community and Amazonian communicator who facilitates processes of resistance and vindication of communities and territories in the region. She believes that we can only transform the difficult times we live in by coming together in various communities, networking, combining our efforts, and directing them towards humanity's greatest challenges. She is currently promoting the divestment from mining campaign. Welcome, Daniela. Bienvenida.
Thank you very much, Angelica, and it's a pleasure to be here and to see very dear friends here. Thank you. So, well, I want to share my testimony today about living here in the Amazon, and I want to start telling you that while we are meeting here, many mothers are bathing or feeding their children with water poisoned by cyanide, mercury, or other toxic solutions. Many mothers are knocking on the doors of the states, almost always deaf to their cries to ask for justice. Mothers feel in their own flesh, they feel in their sick wombs, in the skin of their children, in the fish that feed them with fetid odors. I am also a mother. I live here in the Peruvian Amazon, on the banks of the Marañón River, a river tremendously affected by pollution from oil extractivist industries. The contamination is felt daily. Every day is less fish, which is the main food for our families. The contaminated water produces diarrhea, skin diseases, and hunger. Although we live in the richest territories of our countries, we do not have access to quality water, nor to decent health systems. They do not exist here. Mining and oil companies deceive their communities, lie to their faces, use the states, which are the ones that should protect us. I want to take here some words from Arnaldo So, leader of the Munduruku people in Brazil. He speaks of the pain of seeing his Tapajós River die. Without land, we are nothing. We have not been created. Our river is dying, and soon we will begin to die. Where do they want us to go? He said. Oil and mining extractivism destroys everything in its path: community organization, agricultural and family economies, and deeply wounds the soul of the communities, their secret spaces, their territories, their rivers that are the thread of past, present, and future lives. Most of the communities that live under threat have a common factor: extractivism, mining, oil, timber, gas. Our governments are based on this extractivist, capitalist economic system, regardless of the political tendency, but it protects mining, oil, and infrastructure companies. And these are the companies that set the rules of the game of the global economy. Extractivist companies concentrate capital and increase the gap of injustice and inequality. It is a real lie, this idea that they bring development and better living conditions. And it can be proved in the COVID pandemic. It is also a common factor. Where oil and mining mega projects are settled, the health system are precarious, and the people have to respond with their own wisdom and ancestral medicine. Wisdom, but that, by the way, is also threatened by the devastation of the territories. Most of the decisions about our territories, here in the Amazon, for example, are made outside from here, always putting the interest of the capital before the rights of the people and Mother Earth, with which we are intimately linked. And to get their way, they persecute, criminalize, and even murder us. We are not defending our land for us. We are defending for the whole world, concludes Arnaldo Munduruku in one speech. The Churches and Mining Network warns that mining and extractivist activities provoke serious socio-environmental conflicts, irreversible impacts on socio-biodiversity and with the surrounding communities. From a broader perspective, mining is directly linked to the industrial modern projects of globalization, but it is felt in daily lives of many people and communities. We must make this link between the communities and suffer we must make this link between the communities that suffer and the companies that is causing and provoking this suffering. The cry of the Mother Earth and the cries of the most impoverished have their roots in the economic system in which we are involved. And these pains and wounds of suffering are often caused by us, by a complicit silence or naive indifference. And if we do not take side, we are on the side of the oppressor. The divestment movement is getting stronger and stronger, and it's a great joy that Church is leading these initiatives. From the Churches and Mining Network, we joined to the Fossil Fuel Divestment Initiative, and we joined this call to the call to divest in mining also, because these two activities are causing the biggest impacts in the devastation of Mother Earth. We are calling to take care of our ethical codes for inversions, to promote a real change with activities that are polluting lives. We call for ethical coherence in the management of money and financial practice within the churches. We cannot speak of preferential option of the poorest and support industries that mistreat, violate, and marginalize them. We cannot speak of integral ecology without taking sides with those who suffer the injustice of climate change. Sometimes it seems that divestment initiatives are small or very isolated, but in reality, they are exercises of transparency and trust, of evangelical commitment, of conversion, and conversion is lived from within, from the most delicate and deepest threads. For us, divestment is a process of conversion that encourages us and gives us hope. From the Churches and Mining Network, we reaffirm our commitment to live in a network, united, to encourage this movement for divestment. From very practical commitments, we make ourselves available to advise, train, accompany on divestment and the transition to the investments for social justice, and as Pope Francis is provoking us in Dear Amazonia and Laudato Si. From the churches, we must be promoters of these Samaritan economies, solidarity economies. We need to think together, build together, stay together. That really produce a structural change in this extractivism system that leaves dead and wounded, and that these deaths and wounded are most
I think Daniela's experienced some technical issues. Oh, there we go.
Most vulnerable. And I am telling him that there are a lot of people, a lot of us working and do commitments to make possible that the ones that are following us can live in a dignified place and in a very world. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, for such a powerful testimony and bringing back the point about our faith and that it is a big priority for the sake of humanity to divest. So thank you. And again, a reminder that we will have questions after all our speakers. Thank you so much, Daniela. It is also with great pleasure that I introduce Richard Brooks, who is the director of the Climate Finance Program at Stand Earth. Stand is coordinating the Climate Safe Pensions Network in North America and campaigning to get Canadian banks to defund fossil fuels. Richard has over 20 years of experience setting up, running, and winning campaigns involving multinational corporations and governments with 350.org, Greenpeace, and others, including groundbreaking pension divestment commitment from New York City in 2018. He led 350.org in a successful securing, resulting in a ban on new fossil fuel divestment commitment in New York in 2018, and with ending of gas companies and the end of Williams fracked gas pipeline. Soon after, the New York State $226 billion state pension followed suit with its own decarbonization and divestment plan. Welcome, Richard Brooks.
Thanks for having me here today, and thank you for taking the time. Greetings to everybody around the world who is watching this, and thanks for the comments so far. I'm going to share my screen and put up a presentation, which we can follow along with. See if that's working. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a big development that came out of the state of Maine, which is one of the US states last month, which I think is very significant for advancing the case for fossil fuel divestment by any institution globally. These are some of the headlines that resulted from this announcement last month. And so basically what the announcement was is that Maine became the first jurisdiction in North America, and amongst one of the few jurisdictions in the world, to legislate divestment from fossil fuels. We've seen, obviously, more than 1,000 institutions who have made commitments to divest from fossil fuels. And most of those commitments have come through policy decisions. They've come from kind of unilateral decisions of pension boards or boards of universities. Obviously, faith institutions have their own decision-making structure. But this is the first piece of legislation to actually advance all the way to a vote and be successfully voted on. So quite groundbreaking in terms of it being significant that it went through a legislature and wasn't just a policy decision by an elected official or by a board of trustees. Many of you know that there's been incredible growth in the movement that we're in, the fossil fuel divestment movement, over the last decade. This chart shows you a bit of the growth in terms of the numbers of institutions who have made commitments to divest from fossil fuels. We're now over 1,300 institutions, from pension funds to faith organizations to universities and colleges, cities. We have our first country in the world. Ireland has made a commitment to move off of fossil fuels through divestment. So an incredible growth in this movement that we're all part of. And that growth is fueled by these big developments out of states like Maine, New York City, and New York State. When big institutions make these commitments with Laudato Si, we saw a big surge in commitments from faith organizations after that encyclical was announced, and quite a bit of growth. Now we're at $14 trillion of assets under management, which have made commitments to divest in some form. And you can see a breakdown on this slide of the types of institutions that have made those commitments. The Maine commitment, the legislation that passed in Maine, followed on New York State moving out of tar sands oil. A couple months earlier in February, they made an announcement that they were implementing their divestment plan. One of their first steps was to get out of Canadian oil sands companies or tar sands companies. And prior to that, in 2018, at least in the US, this was a big development. We had New York City move ahead with a commitment to divest its pension funds from fossil fuels. Both New York City and New York State were very significant because of the size of their commitments. The New York City pension funds are valued at over $200 billion. The New York State pension fund is valued at $245 billion now. So very significant. And as many of you know, New York City is the home of Wall Street. So all the big banks, all the big financial institutions, at least in North America and globally as well, are based in that city. And so with the city that has Wall Street moving forward on divestment, that sends a signal and really moves the media narrative around what's possible. If it's possible to move New York State's pension funds out of fossil fuels, then it's very much possible for any pension fund, I would argue, to advance divestment. The campaign in Maine was led by three main groups: Sierra Club Maine, the Maine Youth for Climate Justice, and 350 Maine, with a lot of youth participation. This is very significant and really locked in the commitment of legislators when they were hearing from youth, teenagers, saying, I want our pension fund, a pension fund I may not ever be able to participate in, but I want it to move forward in terms of shedding its exposure to fossil fuels. That was very significant and convincing to legislators who signed on board this piece of legislation. I'll give you some details on the legislation because I think it's important to know some of these details. The Maine state pension fund is valued at about $16 billion. That's US dollars. And they had quite a significant exposure to fossil fuels. 1.3 billion invested in fossil fuels in some form or another. That's about 7% of the fund in fossil fuels. Typically, we're seeing most institutions have their exposure around 2 or 3%. The big difference there with Maine is that they have a number of private equity investments. So these are not publicly traded companies, but are privately held companies. And quite a number of those funds have significant exposure and their own investments in fossil fuels. And that's why that number is so high. The legislation also covered off the money that is controlled by the state treasury department, a separate division of government. They have only a $70 million fund, but still significant. And about 2.5% of that is invested in fossil fuels. The legislation requires both the state treasury and the pension fund to divest by the beginning of 2026. So they have 4.5 years now to move ahead with completing divestment from fossil fuels. What's also significant about this is that because it's a state pension fund, there's quite a bit of connection to state workers. And so you have 110,000 workers who are connected to this fund and are thus connected to this story of divestment. And I think that's significant from an activism standpoint and a climate education standpoint. Now there's this opportunity to talk to these workers even more about what their pension fund is doing to accelerate climate action and move away from the investments that the IEA says are risky investments. Here are some of the comments that were made in regards to the legislation. I think the one that I like the most is that the very simple one that the Maine state treasurer made. This is a bold law and it's a bold statement. And I think he's going to, his words will be proven true in the months to come, as this development in Maine gives a boost to a number of other jurisdictions where legislation is also being pursued. In North America, we have New York that's also pursuing legislation to force divestment of the state teachers pension fund, which is valued at about $150 billion. New Jersey, similar type of legislation. Colorado is pursuing legislation. California is looking at legislation. They have massive pension funds there as well. So this development in Maine is giving a big boost to those jurisdictions as well. I'll just put this slide up quickly. There's often the question of who are they divesting from? What's the definition of fossil fuel companies? The Maine legislation was fairly comprehensive. It targeted the largest investments or the largest fossil fuel companies, as well as a number of other companies as well. So really cleaning up the pension fund and reducing their exposure and the related risk to these investments in fossil fuels. Now let's turn to the IEA report and what it means for pension funds and other significant institutional investors. Here are some of the headlines that we saw when the IEA roadmap report came out. Very significant in terms of its impact, because the IEA report is often the report that the IEA was often quoted by pension funds and as well as other institutional investors as the reason to stay invested in fossil fuels, because the IEA up until this new net zero roadmap was projecting continued growth in fossil fuel usage. And so investors were given this great excuse, I would say, to continue to invest in the companies that continue to have a business model long into the future. What we have with this new net zero report is that there are no more excuses. There are no more excuses to remain invested in fossil fuels. Clearly, with the world's top energy body saying that if you invest in fossil fuels, you are risking your investments. That's a direct quote. If demand is going down, there is no more need for further investments in coal, oil, and gas. So very significant in terms of its impact. And I think all institutional investors and the trustees of these pension boards or other boards who are making decisions around investments need to really pay attention to that report. It will be considered a violation of fiduciary responsibility if one is not considering divestment from fossil fuels. In the past, that has been the excuse that's been given, that one can't divest from a whole sector or risky investments like fossil fuels because it violates one's fiduciary responsibility. But with this latest report from IEA, I think that argument is now removed. I think end dates really matter. Investors need to know where they're going and where there are limits in terms of demand and supply. And the IEA roadmap, by including dates around when we need to stop selling internal combustion engine cars, 2035, when we need to see a phase out of gas-fired power plants, and when we need to reduce gas usage for home heating, I think are significant. What this basically means is that there is no business case now to build new gas-fired power plants anywhere in the world because of the lifespan of those plants. You wouldn't build something now and only operate it for 5 years. That would not make sense from a business perspective. So with the IEA roadmap saying that they need to be phased out by 2035, that means basically no new gas investments are good investments. This is one of the famous charts from the IEA roadmap. I think every divestment activist needs to study it and present it when they're talking to their financial institutions, including faith organizations, because what it shows here is that the financial case for staying invested in fossil fuels has been removed. And I think that is really the message to lead with, is that with this new IEA report, there is no longer a financial case for investing in coal, oil, and gas. So where do we go from here? Well, we've seen lots of developments over the last year in terms of the divestment movement space. You have the administration in the United States, the Biden administration, moving on assessing climate risk. You have some of the biggest institutional asset managers in the world, like BlackRock, who are moving slowly, but still moving on fossil fuels, particularly coal, and whole countries like Ireland and Norway, who are beginning to take real steps out of fossil fuels. It's clear where the writing is on the wall for investments, and it's clear, to me at least, what institutional investors need to do. And I think I will leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time.
Statements and giving us a lot of facts about why fossil fuel needs to go and where our investments need to go. And there has been some questions. I'm just going to introduce our next speaker. We have 2 more speakers, and then we will open up for questions. I am delighted to introduce Sister Joan Brown, who is a Franciscan sister in the congregation of Rochester, Minnesota, affiliated with the Mayo Clinic. She is the executive director of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light, working with religious faith groups and the community at large on various aspects of climate change. She attended the UN climate conferences in Copenhagen and Paris, and currently lives and works in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Welcome, Sister Joan.
Thank you so much, Angelica. And it's so wonderful to be with everyone. As I begin, I just want to reiterate that I live in Albuquerque in New Mexico and on Tewa land. And I pray that my words might be ones that honor this holy place and the people whose land it is. So I'm going to give kind of a case study and talk about some practicalities with divestment with my Franciscan community based in Rochester, Minnesota, and also some experiences here in New Mexico, where we have a lot of oil and gas. In fact, we have the Permian Basin, which is considered a global climate bomb because of the immense amount of oil and gas that's produced there. So my community has divested from fossil fuel. And the reason that we did this were several. One, the urgency of climate change, and seeing that as the most critical ethical and moral issue of our moment, and that we have that spiritual and ethical responsibility to do what we can. And we had already been doing things like, solar energy efficiency with our mother house, local food production, permeable pavements for parking, and those kind of things. And when we were looking at our investments, which we thought was the next step to go, we also had been working to influence oil and gas companies to do the right thing. And we've been doing that for decades. And we saw that little effect, that was having little effect. And so what we did was we weighed through a lot of education and engagement of our communities, what were the pros and cons of doing this? And then So we did that with the community, with our finance board, with our financial advisors. And then we prayed about this decision and we came back. And with that, we realized that we needed to move in this way. Our monies are used for our sisters' retirement fund. And so we needed to make sure that we had enough money for that and our ministries. But we said, this is what we need to do. This is part of our ministry. This is an expression of our ministry and another thing that we might do to address climate change and help our brothers and sisters, which we're called to do, as well as our Holy Sister Mother Earth. And so we talked with our financial manager and we came up with a plan to do that. And I just want to share that maybe now it would take less time for people to do this, but it took us about 5 years for this whole process because we wanted people in the community to have a buy-in. We wanted to make sure we were educating. We wanted to make these decisions in a responsible way. And we also felt it was important to advertise that we had done this and to put that word out. So we're very grateful to the Global Catholic Climate group for being part of that and some other groups for helping us put that out there to encourage others, organizations, faith communities, and institutions to also move in that step. So we found that this did not jeopardize our finances. And in fact, as we divested, and when we divested a large chunk at one point, we actually, in the market, we made some money. And then as our previous speakers were saying, fossil fuels are becoming a stranded asset. And so we would have lost some money, even though that wasn't the intent for doing it. But it just shows that when we do the right things, it's important just to do them and not worry about those things, and somehow we'll be taken care of. So we did do this divestment, and it's been very positive. Probably the largest question and obstacle was some folks in the community felt that it was really important to keep a lot of fossil fuel stocks in order to do the corporate responsible negotiating with the companies, et cetera. But when we looked at the overall history and that really wasn't affecting change within the companies, we decided, no, they've had a chance. We need to move in this direction. So for us, this has been a very important move, and we see it deeply related to our spirituality because we're all interconnected. And our spirituality is intimately part of what we do and how we live our lives. And as Franciscans, we also are committed to conversion, which one of our speakers talked about. So as we've gone forward, it's been kind of a dual thing. It's been the divestment, but we have also done the reinvestment in a lot of solar, wind, a whole global climate change project that we've become part of to assist folks in other countries with new developments, with investments that follow with the UN sustainability goals, addressing food, water, housing, those kinds of things as part of the guidelines for our investment. We look at the works of mercy as part of our spirituality. And in those, we say we're feeding the hungry, giving clothing to the naked, and drink to the thirsty. And we're interpreting that a little differently in our modern time as we evolve in a new place, that we really can't have clean water or give water to the thirsty if there isn't clean water. We can't give, I've added another element to the works of mercy, and that's clean air for the gasping. And we can't have clean air for the gasping if the air is polluted. So that even living out those traditional elements in the Catholic tradition, but in all the other traditions, because I work with interfaith, they're all engaged in climate change and interpreting that within their spiritual practices, their doctrines, their statements now. So we need to look at those and address this. And I was here in our state, we've been working a lot on methane rules, which brings up another topic. As the companies are no longer investing in these fossil fuels and we're doing these negotiations, we need to make sure that these companies also have money for bonding and a plan for cleanup. We have a lot of oil and gas in this state. We are afraid of abandoned and orphaned wells, which would then still continue to emit methane, which is an enormous contributor to climate change over the long haul. And not to speak of polluting the water, which one of our dear speakers spoke of as well. And yesterday in the New York Times, there was a very profound article about women in Nigeria who are suffering from polluted water from a spill with oil and gas. And all of these pipes that in our region are strewn across the desert aren't even included in the bonding. So when we're working with these companies, we have to address those things as well. And it's all part of our spirituality. Francis of Assisi said, at the end of his life, near the end of his life, I have done what is mine to do. May God teach you what is yours. And that comes back to us a lot. And as we're living in this very critical time of climate chaos, and we're seeing it here in our region with the droughts, with the fire, with the smoke, we need to be looking and saying, what is mine to do in this moment, in this time? And so I just, again, speaking from my work with Interfaith Power and Light and in oil and gas regions, we really do need to move very rapidly towards diversification of the economy for those who are economically challenged in those regions who need jobs. We need to move vastly into the new energy economy, and we need to make sure that there are safeguards for those people who are experiencing the pollution of air, water, and land. And to know that this is deeply embedded in our spirituality and that we need to be discerning these decisions, holding that very, very intentionally and praying and moving forward quickly. So I just thank you for letting me be part of this today, and so grateful for all the work that the Catholic Climate Movement is doing and all of our speakers today. So important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Joan, and thank you for, reminding us that we do need to move rapidly. And I just loved how you really brought in the spiritual side to this work and how we can safeguard all people. With my last speaker, I'd like to introduce Kyle Rosenthal. He is part of the Catholic Divestment Network, which is a coalition of fossil fuel divestment reinvestment campaigns representing Jesuit and Catholic colleges and university. The network seeks to be a medium for resource sharing, mentoring, publicity, growth, and general campaign support with the aim of achieving divestment from fossil fuels at each of the member universities. Kyle is also a member of the Climate Justice Boston, a coalition of Boston College students, faculty, and alumni promoting the university's divestment from fossil fuel companies and fostering active participation in climate justice. Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here with the GCCM and all of the other speakers. And so a lot of what I work on, and have to say, a lot of the other speakers have gone through and really just are, as a coalition, we really just focus in on that university aspect of things. And, as faith-based universities, we're kind of held up as the epitome of both the faith and the academic side of things. And because of that, there's a really unique role. And on top of that, obviously, a lot of our universities have, massive endowments and investments. So again, all the things that we're talking about today, kind of, I feel like personally to me, intersect at universities because of not just the actual investments, but also the statement that is made by universities divesting, just because, again, of that power and influence that they hold for students, among academics, and really all people around the world. And so I think that we're seeing a lot of momentum among Catholic universities around the world in the previous few months and in the upcoming year. I know when COVID-19, the pandemic hit, we were very nervous that universities, a lot of which put a halt to a lot of things, might not be announcing divestment at the pace that they were before. But we actually saw an increase in those announcements for a number of factors, but mostly because of the fact that, again, fossil fuel investments were continuing to fall, and it just made more sense financially not to be in those. And so I think that there's a big opportunity coming up for Catholic universities to be leaders, not just on divestment, but on reinvestment, which, again, a lot of other speakers have discussed. And that means, not just reinvesting in renewable and sustainable solutions, which is certainly part of it, but also locally. Again, I think universities hold an interesting and unique place, not just, globally, but within specific local communities. And I think a big part of that means, again, acknowledging the land that universities are on. And part of that reconciliation process means dialogue. And again, discussing with local leaders, local activists, people who are actually affected by climate change. What does it mean when we divest our money from fossil fuels to reinvest that in the local community, whether that means literally in businesses where we're putting money into, certain banks or local credit unions. And again, just kind of having a robust community around you because of the impact that universities have there. So again, I think that is going to be a big part of university divestment processes going forward, is what does it mean to connect with people affected by climate change and our communities and neighborhoods that we're in. And at the same time, we are seeing a lot of universities, Catholic universities, that aren't divesting yet. And I think we have to be, very careful and wary, because there are those ones that are seeing all this action and activity, which is very great, and others that, haven't taken any action. And also, we see certain universities that are kind of doing things in a reverse order, where we see some that are, maybe doing land acknowledgements, but not divesting, or the other way around, divesting and not acknowledging the land that they're on and taking action. And again, that kind of flies in the face of this definition of justice and what it means to center justice to us, because if you divest but don't really acknowledge what that means, or the other way around, you acknowledge the impact of climate change on certain communities, but you don't take your money out of fossil fuels, what are you really doing? What are you really saying? Why are you doing these things? And so again, I think as Catholic universities, we're at this unique place where we can kind of really bring all that together, define that justice, center that justice. And again, I think a big part of that means having direct dialogue and conversation with as many stakeholders as possible. And so one of the other things that we're seeing is, a lot of commitments to divest, especially with the release of Pope Francis's and the Vatican's Journeying Toward Care for Our Common Home, that kind of 5-year follow-up to Laudato Si. Laudato Si really made the case, clear for us, but now it's kind of been laid out, codified, and really now we're kind of seeing what does it mean to actually implement those commitments. And so I think that's where it's really important, is, we see universities saying that they, again, care about these certain things, but, how are they going to get there? And so recently, I believe just a week ago, Gonzaga University in the state of Washington in the US committed to become a fair trade university. And they took a look at their operations, the food that they offered in dining halls to students, and what impact that might have, the clothes that they sell. And again, I think that's just kind of one example of one step of sort of an implementation plan toward reaching, net zero by 2050, both in investments, but also, in terms of just general operations and emissions. Universities obviously require a lot of energy and inputs, and we want to look at also what they're putting out as well. And so again, I look at that as just one example of, a university saying, hey, we committed to certain things, by certain years. How are we actually going to do that? And that means, fair trade, procuring from sustainable sources, recognizing what it means to procure things locally rather than elsewhere, both for costs and again, for moral and justice reasons. And so again, we're also seeing a lot of momentum and change, I think, in the faith-based activist community, as Richard was talking about earlier, with the state of Maine legislating divestment and sort of this new look at fiduciary duty. At Boston College, the school I attended, that's kind of some action that's going on there with the university's administrators and board of trustees. Have been very reluctant and resistant to divest from fossil fuels, to engage in any sort of dialogue, commit to carbon neutrality, that sort of thing. And so right now, students, including myself and faculty, alumni, community members, have engaged in a legal process and investigation with the Attorney General of the state to look at Boston College and other universities in the state and how investing in fossil fuels as nonprofit charitable organizations is actually incredibly dangerous and directly goes against our mission as a Jesuit Catholic university. And so again, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that the way other universities see it as sort of this Catholic obligation to divest, and what that looks like was something that they did as well. But as they aren't, we're seeing actions like that being taken, and hopefully kind of that process ultimately leads to some more introspection on the part of, everyone in the university community, up to and including the board of trustees, to ultimately make that decision to divest. And as I said earlier, not just to divest, but to really understand what that means and take that money, put it into the local community, put it into solutions, and make it, sort of a university-wide understanding of the impact that we have in our operations and our investments. And again, how that is all rooted and centered in, our faith-based principles of justice And again, just the morality around all of that. It's not just a statement. It's not just an action. It's part of this, sort of larger understanding of who we are and the impact that we have institutionally and as individuals. And I think, again, that's sort of the great part about being a Catholic university or a Catholic institution, is we can go far beyond saying this is just about fiduciary duty. This is just about investments. This is just about appeasing activists, because it might be all of those things, but it's also much, much larger than that. And we can be very clear and explicit about why we do those things. So I'm very excited for this upcoming year to see all of those different pieces at play and to really focus in on that implementation aspect of things, and where we can say, our investments are tied to our mission. And we are going to be very clear in how we communicate about that from, universities all over. We've seen some already do that. And I think they're going to kind of hopefully help lead the larger network of Catholic universities for us in the US and Canada and UK, but also around the world, because they are in so many communities. And again, I think that they can have a really big part in affecting their own operations, but also all those communities that they are rooted in, whether that's, helping their municipality or state or country to divest, or, taking other action there. So again, I'm very excited to see where all of this goes. And thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to any of the questions that we have.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you for making that great point about the power universities have in being local leaders and justice centers. So that was such a positive note of moving forward in implementation. There's been lots of questions coming in. I wish we could have a lot more time to dive in, because all of the speakers have really not only just dived into some of these deeper conversations about divestment and spirituality and tied into what the connection is. But I'm just going to jump into some of the questions as we are almost wrapping up our webinar. I know one of our speakers had to leave, but there was a question that was put in the chat that are there problems with fossil fuel companies suing institutions that divest from them? So Richard responded that there are currently no cases to date of institutions being sued for divesting from fossil fuels, though this is possibly a tactic that oil and gas companies would fund as we continue to build momentum and success. And so these questions are open to any of you panelists that are here. One of the questions was, as we divest, what companies do you suggest we invest in? Feel free just to go ahead and answer.
Well, with the point about being local, I think is really good. And in my Franciscan community, and also here in New Mexico, faith people, investing in local companies that may be doing solar or wind energy, or looking at alternatives or addressing water and water systems or food production would be good companies. And that's what we had tried to do. And then also globally, we have tried to do some investing globally, because for those kind of innovative projects in my community, and that's a more difficult thing to find. We're very fortunate to have a very, very good financial advisor and manager that helps us. So that's what I would suggest is local, and just see what's available and talking with your manager.
Great, thank you. Another question is, how can we as individuals pool our resources together to allow us to have the same clout such as Sister Joan's congregations? We as individuals are like grains of sand rather than a beach. Any ideas of how we can put together some of this resources?
Well, I know that the GCCM does have a lot of resources on their website, so I would definitely direct people there. But yeah, I think as Sister Joan was saying, maybe 5 years ago, it might have been difficult for individuals and even institutions to divest and figure out how to reinvest easily. Now, I know many mainstream investment platforms offer very clear and really, really good, robust investment opportunities for individuals. And so again, it just is a little bit of research or having a conversation with whoever may manage your portfolio. But again, a lot of those opportunities, exist now and are really readily available. And obviously there is greenwashing that's a part of that. So it's just a matter of, taking that extra 5 or 10 minutes to read through, any statements about things and making sure that fossil fuels are not part of whatever it is that you're looking for. But again, you can really look locally, and there are a lot of opportunities to invest in, whether it's a local solar project or a wind farm or any other solution like that.
Thank you.
And I'd like to just add one other point to that, though, too, because some people don't have the luxury of having investments, and they want to do something. And if they're a member of a faith community or a diocese, an individual and you with a friend or a neighbor or family member can have a conversation, can find out what the investments are in those larger entities and make a difference. All of these things about divestment started with one person. And so that's another possibility and opportunity.
Great, thank you. That's an excellent point, Sister Joan. A question says, how can we convince Catholic institutions in Latin American countries to divest if they answer that they don't have investment portfolios? Perhaps maybe Daniela, especially being that you are in Latin America, have maybe come across this with some of the companies. If you're still here with us, Daniela, or anybody else, you're welcome to jump in and maybe have some suggestions.
Well, from our presentation from our wonderful speaker from Amazon, it seemed like So from our wonderful presentation from the Amazon, it seems like solidarity in working with some of the grassroots and the local people who are really trying to get those companies to do the right thing in terms of pollution or cleanup or those kind of things. While that's maybe indirectly related to investment or divestment, it is related. And to call accountability and that kind of solidarity work is just a suggestion.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Tomas.
Yeah, I can say a quick word about that. Being from Argentina myself, there's many countries, of course, where Catholic institutions don't have any sizable financial investments. There are two things that are to be considered there. One is what banking services the institution uses. So maybe it's not millions of dollars in financial assets, but there's a bank account somewhere, and there's growing pressure on banks to move away from fossil fuels. That's slightly different from fossil fuel divestment per se, but it's related. So I know that countries like the Philippines, for example, there's a lot of movement in that regard of Catholic institutions moving away to banks that are friendly to the earth. And second, I'd say another thing is in the divestment campaign, something we greatly welcome is commitments, even if the institution might not have financial investments to divest from, at least making there's one of the pledge categories that says something like, we will never invest even in the future. If we were to have financial resources, we will not invest them in fossil fuels. So it's a way of, let's say, participating symbolically, but it makes a clear stand. That's the most important, I think, value of divestment. This is a very clear stand and signal that it sends. So that's an option that is available on the website. If you check the divestment options, that's one of the options you could select.
Great, thank you. We could go on this conversation, and it's been very fruitful and delightful to have all of your input and lots of great information, but lots of things to do. So we are on this roadmap to do work. And so thank you so much. I want to move forward with this call to action. Tomas mentioned that we will be having a divestment announcement that will take place in October 25th specifically. You can go to our website and find more information about this webinar that we will have. The registration, you can register October 18th, and here at this divestment is an opportunity to hear from all the institutions that we have been collaboratively working with that will be announcing their divestment. So we invite you all to take action and join us on October 25th for this call to action and divestment announcement. And so once again, it's been a delight to be your moderator for today. I'd like to open up the floor to my colleague Svetlana, that is our Zero Fossil Fuel Campaign Manager. Welcome, Svetlana.
Yes, thank you so much. And my word would be that no way for fossil fuels in the current world, because as we've seen from our brilliant presentations from our fantastic speakers, that's all possible. And the era of fossil fuels is coming to its end. So I would like greatly appreciate our speakers for making the time to be with us and so generously sharing their thoughts and experiences and this beautiful activism and your beautiful divestment cases and your frontline communities fight cases. We could not have asked for better guest speakers as you have been. And a lot of thanks to our amazing Global Catholic Climate Movement team, especially comms team and advocacy team, and our director, Tomas Insua, and our moderator, Angelica Gonzalez-Apple, our North America program manager, for hosting this event today. I would only come back to presentation and share with you invitation to join our next divestment announcement, and that we will be hosting 2 calls on August 19 and September 16. These calls will be open. Please follow our social media, and we will update you with those news and our email blast as well. Those calls would be the same time as we had this webinar today. Please join us. We will answer all questions about divestment, what it is, how to divest, where to invest or reinvest, and how to make this world a better place with no chance for fossil fuels. Thank you so much for being with us today. And please contact me in particular if you need to know something about divestment in the future.
Thank you so much, Svetlana. And thank you so much to all of you that joined us today. Thank you for your lovely comments. For this panelist, there's been nothing but wonderful comments, thanking you all for the information you've provided for them, and thanking you all for the wonderful work that you do and inspiration to the work that we continue to do as a Catholic faithful community. And so if there's anything you'd like to close with, Tomas, I just would like to thank you all and wishing you all a wonderful day.
Yeah, no more, just gratitude as well. Thanks to Sister Joan, Kyle, Daniela, and our speakers, Richard and Dr. Virol. It was such a joy to hear you all. And well, looking forward, hopefully this conversation galvanizes even more divestment momentum. We need everybody to reach out. It really is a word of mouth exercise, so we really count on everybody watching this webinar, even on our speakers as well, to reach out to 1 or 2 more institutions each. We need to build that critical mass, and it really is all about word of mouth. So yeah, looking forward for a really big group. Hopefully the amount of Catholic institutions divesting is growing year over year. So we hope that the next one on October 25th will be really huge. So we really need it. We have no choice. So it's wonderful to have 250 Catholic institutions divesting, but there's so many more who haven't divested yet. So we really need everybody to accelerate the pace of change as the climate emergency requires. I think we have no option. So I think that's pretty much it from me. Warm greetings from Rome, and well, looking forward to this next announcement, and see also in the season of creation there will be plenty of action as well. And sorry, last but not least, see you this Thursday. We're announcing a series of big changes in the identity of the movement. So I make this parish announcement at the very end. Thursday at 3 p.m. Rome time, we're announcing our new name and refreshed identity. So we hope to see you there as well. So back to you, Angelica. Thanks so much for hosting.
Thank you. And so there was a comment of how can they reach out to us. You can find our information on our website. For myself, my name is Angelica again, and then my email is angelica@catholicclimatemovement.global. For Svitlana, it's Svitlana, SVITLANA @catholicclimatemovement.global, and hopefully we can get that on the screen. If not, especially you animators in North America, reach out to me and I will put you in contact with Svitlana. Thank you again. We will see you soon on Thursday, as Tomas mentioned. Take care. Thank you again. See you soon.
God bless.